So this one's a little bit more complicated, right? Because it's not, so for context, for the video, in case we do want to use this. So now we're working on a change that has yet to be communicated to the organization. April and I have agreed that she's going to take on new responsibilities around operational management and helping us all be efficient in the use of the handbook and in the way that we collaborate asynchronously. However, this change is not yet documented in the handbook. So what we're doing now is we're going to actually do this in a handbook first approach. April is going to write the change in her new role. And then we're going to create a merge request to actually talk about what that change is, align between the two of us on exactly what her responsibilities are, and then share that with the rest of the team in a way that can be communicated more broadly. So we're starting that process with the realization that there's no place in the handbook right now where it's obvious on how of where to document this change. And I think this is something that we're going to run into a lot, right? As we're getting into new processes, we're finding that there's actually not, there's not an obvious place in the handbook. So there's going to take a little bit of creativity in terms of figuring out how to organize the handbook around this. So April, step me through your thought process here. I don't want to actually give you what I think is the answer because I don't know that I have the right answer necessarily. And I also want to show that, in fact, this is something that everybody in the company is going to kind of grapple with a little bit of this question of where does something live? How do I approach it?
So just my first thought looking at the structure right now, my first thought without even looking at this page would be to add it to Teams. Just because whenever I think of Teams, I think of that's the place that describes everyone's role for each, department, so to speak, or team within an organization.
Great, let's go with that.
Okay. Okay. And
so read through that page and and tell me where you think you should put it.
Okay, so under organizational structure, because I'm seeing here, up at the top, we're defining each department, so to speak. But at the bottom here is where we have it listed out, specific roles that belong to each person. So obviously it would go here.
Great, okay. I think that makes sense. So one thing to note, scroll up just a little bit and let me introduce one concept in terms of in Markdown. You'll see that sometimes there's 3 things here, and then in other places there's only 2. And what that is it's talking about the level of header. So preview the Markdown here, just to see the difference between these. So this is go to the top. This is an H1 or an H2. This is a level of heading that's below that. Scroll down a little bit more. Keep scrolling, and let's see one that's a different. Yeah, so you can see here's a great example that this is a different level of header than this one, right? This is probably an H3 and this is probably an H2. You can go look at that. But the idea is that conceptually you're creating a hierarchy of different headers on the page. And in Markdown, that's done by the number of hash marks you put in front of the header. So go back to edit here. Sorry, not the. You're on a different. Yeah, you're on a different file. Oh, you moved over. You moved over to index.nd. Yeah, there you go. Great. Yeah, I get confused with that all the time.
Okay. So down here to organizational structure.
Right. So, and the reason I pointed that out is because you have 2 options now. You can either create a new header that's parallel to organizational structure, or you could put this underneath organizational structure and make this an H3. Right. Organizational structure is an H2, so you could do an H3 that's underneath it, or you could do a new thing that is also an H2. So what do you think is going to make sense?
I think keeping it all together makes sense because this is just my personal opinion, but I feel like breaking it up too much can get kind of lost in translation when you're coming to naming specific people. I think it's best to keep it together and give like a high level overview of all the names and titles.
Great. And the spirit of the handbook first approach is that you should take your best guess and proceed with it. We can always change it later if we need to.
Okay.
So I want you to go with that best guess and go ahead and make the change in the way you think it makes the most sense.
Okay. Now, one other title we haven't necessarily communicated is the program manager for AIR. So would you want me to shift this responsibility at this time, or just focus on my title only?
Well, what do you think makes the most sense? How would you like to roll out this change?
I would do both at the same time.
Great.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's the best sense, because the change is we're shifting your role, and there's two things associated with that. One is to remove the concept that you're the program manager for AIR, and the second is that you are taking on a new set of responsibilities.
Okay, perfect. Now, in this instance, we're going to have someone with two titles. So how would you join them together? Would you do like CSM and program manager? Is there a way to do that here in Markdown to where it will look tidy, or do I just go ahead and add it just like this with the parentheses? And
I would say take your best guess, and if it's something that you really don't want to take a guess on or don't want to change, we can always add a comment in the merge request itself to point out something that you think needs further thought. So I'd say what I would do is encourage you to take your best guess.
okay, that's my best guess. So let's do a preview. Okay, I mean, that looks okay. I'm just wondering, is there, I thought that the parentheses were just something for Markdown. Is this the way it's going to appear on public pages in parentheses like this?
Yes, that's the way it'll appear.
Okay.
There are times when parentheses are used for meta information in Markdown, but let's go into that as a separate thing, because I think that'll bring us more down the path of learning about Markdown, which I think is not the right goal for this particular topic.
Okay. Well, I'm fine with this layout. I think if we're keeping the structure of the parentheses for the roles, then this makes sense. You know, whether someone's particular about spelling out AND or using the symbol, you know, that's up to personal preference. I'll just leave it as this for now.
Sounds good.
Okay. Commit. Now, since I'm changing Zeusi's title, does it need to be approved by anyone other than yourself?
Well, what do you think?
Well, I would think that, yes, it needs to be approved by someone. So I would commit this or create a new branch. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then let's say updated roles and titles.
Great. Now, one thing about this is just in general, a best practice is to talk in present tense rather than past tense. I know that our default is to talk about that, but the idea is that you're describing the change that you are in the act of making. So I would just say update.
Okay. Update roles and titles. And then this would be for the write-up.
This one is simple, and I think it's simple enough that you don't need to do anything there. We can talk about more complicated changes shortly.
Okay, so submit merge request. Okay. All right, and then it would go, do I need to do an assignee for this?
Nope, that will automatically go to the management team. So let me share my screen and I'll actually show you how I received this.
Okay.
Okay, so I see update role and title opened by April Malone. I will go in and look at this. I see Zeusi, CSM, and Program Manager for AIR. And now I actually would prefer to have this all in, I think having two sets of parentheses is a little confusing. So I can actually go straight into here, and I will just do that. I'll combine it as a set of parentheses, so it's consistent with how I formatted the rest. I'll add that change. Now you see I'm adding it directly to your target branch. So now the change looks like this. It's changing this line, April program manager for air, to operations manager. And I'm changing Zusi into one line of CSM and program manager for air. So that looks good to me. Now what I'd say is, I'd say the other thing I can do is I want to say, well, April, how do you want to do this? We can do this as one change, or we can do a more compound change. I think the next step in this process, we need to actually describe what your new responsibilities are. And I'd like to add that into the handbook as well. What would be your preference, to do this as 2 separate merge requests, or to do this as one? In terms of instructional reasons.
Well, wouldn't it have to be 2 separate ones since they're located in 2 different areas? Is that right?
No, I think there. So there are a couple of ways that we could do this. Here's what here's. Let me actually just. I'll just type this in. I think this change would also be be better understood by the team if we include a description of what responsibilities you will assume. Okay, so I'll share that with you. So, and hold on. Okay, so I'll say, for instance, we've discussed these. So here, note that I'm, oh, interesting. GitLab did some strange documenting there. Wow, GitLab does some strange formatting there. So GitLab, by the way, also in its comments uses Markdown. So you can see here that we're doing that. So we discussed these. Could you please add this to the handbook as well? Okay. So April, what I would like to do is use this and actually update April's role. And I'll actually prefix it with a draft, so I know not to merge this in yet. So let's do this as a compound merge request. Now we have, and we're actually going to a slightly more advanced thing here. So let me just give you a quick tour of what this is doing now. So what I'm basically saying is, I think we haven't yet explained what your role is, and I would like to do that in this same change. So rather than rolling out 2 things or communicating 2 things to the organization, I'd like to just communicate it as one. So now we have a merge request that has 2 different commits to it, right? We have one that you made, which you can see here. You did it that way. And then we have a second that I've added on top of that, which is this, and I made this change. Do you follow?
Yep.
Okay. So now what we're going to do, though, is I'm going to give it back to you and ask you to make one more change so that we have something to roll out of what we think these things are.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. So here's where you added your suggestions. I think this change. Okay, I'm just going to copy this. And then
So here's,
I always
yeah,
forget.
so now we're in a new thing, right? So here, what you need to do here is actually go to this merge request here. So this is showing the branch that you're on. And I would say open this in the IDE. So yeah.
Okay.
Now, one thing I just want to point out, just for context, is that if you look here, this is showing you that you're editing a branch of the handbook, right? So you're making an additional change on that same branch that you started a while ago.
Okay.
Okay.
And then this looks a little bit different. So what would I click on
No,
to
it's the
see?
same. You just need to navigate. It's in the docs.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Docs and then handbook index. No, it
So I
was
think we're on
index.
the
No,
we're
we
on
were
the
in the
company
team
page.
company
Yeah, it's under company. Yeah.
and teams. Okay. So this would fall under operations, right? But this is for me personally, what my role is. So
Right. So here you're forging new ground, right? There's no place in
yeah.
the handbook today that we describe a specific role. Although perhaps we describe that role. Actually, if you scroll up on this same page, there is a place that kind of maps to this.
Okay.
If you look under customer success, we have content marketing and operations as two things.
Yep.
Mm. This is interesting. I don't actually know.
Yeah, this
I'm not sure the
operations is
right.
a little bit different than what
Exactly.
this is. Almost like what we're trying to accomplish is business operations, not
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
I think what's happened here is that we are creating, it's almost like a new function within the organization. Yeah, so I would go down to this bottom part under the organizational structures and accountabilities.
Okay.
And I'd probably just tack this on. I'd probably just add a third header underneath. I'd add an H3 and say, you know, operations management.
That's H3, right? 3 hashtags.
Yep.
Okay. And then operations what? I'm sorry.
Operations management.
Sure.
The goal here would be to write this to the audience of anybody in the company. So like when you want to have a conversation with Mutali about the thing that you're working on with F&B, you want to be able to share something with Gia to say, hey Gia, here are the things that I'm working on and what my goals are. So I would say this is just something so that you don't have to like say it multiple times to multiple people. You can just send a link and say, hey, here's what I'm working on. And be able to give them that context.
All right. Looks fine to me.
Great.
There's not too much fancying up that you can do with this.
Yeah. So go ahead and commit it.
New branch.
Okay. And now, no. So in this case, so note here that you're not committing to master. You're actually committing to the branch that started this merge request.
Okay.
So we're going into a new skill here that we have not talked about. But it's all in, because this is on a branch, it's on a safe space. And so I would say just commit it directly to that branch since we're already working on something else. It would be fine if you created it as a new branch, but it's just not, it's not necessary. Okay, so now let me switch back to my screen. And we'll go back to, I'll show you what that did here. Okay, so I'm seeing the same merge request now, update April's role. I see that you've made a new change here, right? And I can compare that with the previous revision. So I can see, okay, this is exactly what April did. You added this, you said April is taking on a role of operations manager to create efficient Great. There's a couple of things that I want to edit around this. So rather than talking about this, this is something that is I want the handbook to be in present tense, right? So I would say, I will just correct this to say the role of operations manager is to create efficient and effective asynchronous, or I'd say the purpose of role is to create, okay, this includes the following. And then the other thing that I would do is I would just say, this is something that's temporary in time. So I don't think it's, what do you think about, just since we have the chance to talk through this, what do you think of those changes, April?
Yep, I agree. Looks good.
Great. So then what I'll do is so you can see there is no problem in you proposing it that other way. It gives me a very easy way to wordsmith or make the changes that I care about.
Yeah.
And super efficient. So I just want to say it is absolutely right that you proposed it in the way that you thought was best, and totally fine for me to go ahead and make some edits on top of that, right? You moved us closer to the goal, and I can use most of your wording. There were a few things that I wanted to tweak as I made the change. That doesn't mean that I was unhappy with your changes. So I'll go back here. I think now, April, you and I might check in briefly and just look at that. If we looked at all the changes at once now, right, you can see that, so there's two ways to view this. One, I can look at each of the changes individually, right? I can look at, oops, sorry, I navigated away from this. Go back to this. So I can look at this as an evolution and see the changes that were made at each step along the way, right? Or I can look at this as the sum aggregate of everything that's taking place in the merge request, which is one file, 9 additions, 2 removals. If I look through that, it's now saying, okay, the full set of changes are that we're changing April to operations manager, we're changing Zusi to program manager for AIR, and we are adding this section here, which doesn't have all the sort of changes that you and I went back and forth on. It just shows the final role that we're talking about it. Does that make sense? Do you see how the tool is helping us see the full set of changes?
Yes.
Okay. So great. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I think this is ready to go. Do you think this is ready to go?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to say, mark this as ready. We can't actually merge it until it has if it has this draft. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it as ready. And I'm going to say, as the manager now, I'm going to say this has a few people that I want to make sure are aware of this. At Nicholas, Minsa, and Zusi. We're proposing a change to April's role that I'd like to share in the handbook. I'd like to share. Let's see. So April, now let's just think through this rollout process. Is there anybody that you think is important to be aware of this change?
Yes, Penny and Natali, since I work closely with them, and I'm sure they're aware of Zusi transitioning to AIR, but they need to be involved as well.
I'm going to go ahead and leave this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave this as draft for now and not actually roll it out. I'm going to leave this MR as a draft for now so that we can review, so that you have an opportunity to ask questions or before the change becomes official. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign to Minsa. Okay, so what do you think of this process? Basically what I'm saying is I'm including all of them in the change, but assigning Minsa to collect and work on that feedback.
Yeah, I think that's good to involve everyone in the decision and let them
Great,
provide feedback. Yeah, I think that's a good approach.
great. Good. And so that illustrates then how we can use an MR also to collaborate with people and talk through the change. But the nice thing is that as soon as it's ready, it goes live. And if it's in its final version, then it's immediate. There's no more work that needs to take place, right? If there are questions and comments, we can go make them directly into the handbook or into this branch, just the same way that I made changes on yours. And if there are no concerns, then all we have to do is press approve. And Minsa is now the one who's going to make that final approval.